group of us from New York, about 7 of us, got in a car to go up to see Ram Dass as soon as he got back to the East Coast. So we went up to Montreal. And while we were there, 2 of the people in the group said they were going to India and they were going to find Maharaji come hell or high water. And Ram Dass looked at the group of us that were there, and we're talking about Krishna Das, the people who became Krishna Das, Ramesh Das, all of these people. And he looked at us and he said, I will tell you where to go. And it was like suddenly being given the secret of the Supreme. All of a sudden, we knew that we could go to India.
What does it mean to love everyone? Parvati Markus is here today as a witness to that answer. Parvati personally knew Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba. She was inspired by the teachings of Ram Dass back in 1969 to embark on the adventure of a lifetime and went to India to meet Maharaji. While she was there, she met so many other people who were on spiritual journeys of their own. And since then, she's been compiling their stories and the stories of people who have been inspired by Maharaji's spirit and the principle of love everyone. I want to thank Parvati for her time today. This is truly a miraculous interview. You'll know what I mean from watching this episode. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you for listening, and peace. Parvati, thank you very much for being on the podcast today. Welcome to the Stories by Joe podcast. I appreciate you being here today. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah,
a little warm, but everything else is good.
Yeah, it's warm up here in New York as well. So it's I guess it's warm all around. But yeah, again, I just want to thank you. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, just the first question I wanted to ask you that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast here is, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and where you're from originally?
Sure. I was born in the Bronx, New York City girl. Only lived there for a year and a half. Moved to Staten Island, another part of New York City. And then when I was 10, moved to Long Island, where I was until I went off to college in upstate New York. And after that, I was in Boston, where I worked for the research and development firm. And then life took off.
I know that your life is very much revolved around spirituality in many ways, and about the connection that you have with Maharaji and the relationship that was established there. And then since then, obviously, you've written several publications about your experiences and about other people's experiences as well. But I kind of just wanted to start with the beginning. That's why I asked where you're from originally, because I'm curious, did you have any sense of spirituality or religion when you were first growing up?
None.
None. Okay.
None. Absolutely. My parents were not religious in any way. I think they attempted to send me to a Sunday school type of thing for a little bit of Jewish education when I was young. But I came back and started to I wanted them to start lighting candles, and they pulled me out immediately. So it wasn't actually until I took LSD that I had any connection to the spiritual realm whatsoever. Except I was searching. I was always searching. I mean, in college, I took courses on the Bible. I mean, I was very much into discovering the books that were available to us back in the early 60s and mid 60s. Siddhartha, the Herman Hesse books, the things that touched that place. But I had no experience of it until I actually found Timothy Leary's book, High Priest. And it was the first time I had ever heard the words cosmic consciousness. And I suddenly went, oh, that's what I'm looking for. It totally resonated that here was actually something that was related to the constant searching that I felt. And then when I took acid for the first time, which was in the summer of 1969, I actually went directly into an experience of oneness. And when I came down from that trip, somebody handed me the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I started reading it and going, oh, exactly what happened. Yes, yes, yes. And 3 weeks later, I met Ram Dass. So
wow,
it was like
talk about things lining up. That's incredible. So, what would you say started that desire for searching for something deeper? I guess you can put it like, because obviously you talked about your experiences with LSD and how that kind of catapulted you into this search much deeper. But it seems like it began before that. Was it perhaps?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was something never seemed. I mean, I grew up in the 50s. There was nothing soul satisfying about it. It was all the materialism that followed World War II. It was all the everybody was smoking cigarettes. I was smoking cigarettes. I went to college. You smoked, you drank. All the girls wanted to be pinned, engaged, married by the time they were a year out of college. And I just didn't relate to that world. It didn't pull me. It didn't seem like where I wanted to go. Not that I knew where I wanted to go, but this wasn't it. So there was always that searching. Yeah. In college, I mean, we had a course called Western Civilization, which was a required heavy-duty course for several years. And in it, we read a lot of the works of what we used to call dead white men. It included nothing feminism. It included nothing. This was all before that time. It included nothing of anything Eastern. If I had had a course on Buddhism or available to me, or a course on any of those Eastern philosophies, it would have been very, very different. But I didn't know anything about them at all. Yeah.
Did you have a desire then to explore any of your Jewish roots at all and the history of like Jewish mysticism?
I didn't even know there was Jewish mysticism. I had never heard of Kabbalah. I had never heard of anything like that. The only thing I knew of were bar mitzvahs of boys. I didn't even know there was a bat mitzvah possible for a girl. It was a very different time. I mean, we're talking about when I went to college, I was called into the dean's office for wearing slacks instead of a skirt.
Wow, times have changed for the better.
Times have changed. Wow. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah.
So would you say when you first took LSD that was kind of like a catapulting point for your spiritual development?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was completely the turning point in my life because it led me directly to Ram Dass. I mean, if I had met him before I took LSD, what happened was that after 3 weeks of taking LSD every weekend with this group of people I was living with, everybody in this group house sort of started falling apart. And I called my cousin who lived in Vermont. He was on the faculty of Goddard College, which was sort of the hip college in the Northeast at that time. And he came and got me. And the next day we went to a party. And here are all these educators at this party in Goddard. And there was one guy in the corner playing a guitar. I immediately headed over to the guy playing the guitar, and he said, "Hey, you want to go meet a saint?" Now, 3 weeks before, I would have said, "No, they don't exist. What are you talking about?" But because I had opened to the possibility of that through my experiences on acid, I said, "Sure, why not?" And the next day we drove up to Ram Dass's father's farm in New Hampshire. And Ram Dass was sort of standing at the front door, and he was wearing his sort of white robe from India, doing his mala. barefoot. And all I could see, and I was straight. I hadn't smoked anything. I hadn't dropped anything. I was straight. And I looked at him and all I could see was light coming out of him. And I couldn't even speak. I mean, it was just such a profound experience. Fortunately, the guy I was with was able to. And Ram Dass told us, well, just go meet the people that are here, and this evening we'll all get together and talk. And there were only maybe a dozen people that were there at the time. And each one of them I went up to, it was like, where do I know you from? Did you go, where did you go to school? Where did you go to camp? Why do I know you? I had found my tribe and didn't know it. I mean, these are the people who later became Krishna Das and Rameshwar Das and Radha, and all the people that were part of my soul pod.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I know that they're in that soul pod. There's several people with the last name Markus. How does that play a role? I know Raghu and there's several others. How are you guys all related, or how does that work?
Oh yeah. Well, Maharaji married me to Raghu when we were in India, and long story. And he was there in India. His brother was there in India, and while we were there, his father came to India. So actually, and later his sister came to India with his father. So practically every member of his family, of the Markus family, was with Maharaji.
Okay.
So that
makes sense.
Yeah.
So you first get up there, and this is at his father's property in New Hampshire, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long were you there for with your soul pod? And can you tell me a little bit more of the experiences up there? Because I know eventually you did end up going to India and met with Maharaji, but what was it like, your time up there in New Hampshire?
All right. This is the summer of 1969. Okay. I mean, Woodstock happened up the road from where we were, and some of the people who were there went. But I knew nothing. I mean, I had walked into this group of strange people who were going around and going, Namaste. I didn't know what they were talking about. But I knew I had to be there immediately. I knew that I needed to be there. I mean, there was no question about it. And so I convinced this guy I was with that there was nothing he'd rather do than come live with me that summer, because I was afraid to go live in the woods by myself. And we were all living in the woods that were sort of around the 3-hole golf course that was in the back of his father's property. And so we did. We moved in, and I think the third day that we were there, Ram Dass asked at our sort of morning meeting, can anybody here type? And I raised my hand because that was one thing I had learned in high school that has done me well for the rest of my life. Because this is way before computers we're talking about. So I became Ram Dass's secretary, which was perfect because he would record answers to the snail mail that he was getting. He had already spoken in a number of places around the country, and people were writing to him with questions, and he would answer them, and I would type them up for him. And in doing so, I started learning this new vocabulary. I started learning what it meant when he talked to them about karma or about dharma or about darshan or all of these words that were totally foreign to me. So it was an incredible education. I mean, other people who had met Ram Dass earlier when he had come back in 1968 from India. And those who had met him earlier had sort of done the things he was teaching them to do, like meditating and doing the mala, doing mantra. But I knew nothing. So I wasn't going out to the woods to fast. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing that. I was sitting in the barn with the typewriter answering Ram Dass's mail, typing it up. Yeah.
Yeah, in its own way, that's a very spiritual process, I would say too, right?
Absolutely.
It's your dharma, right? I would say
Right.
doing that.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was an incredible experience. And I spent a lot of the time in the kitchen helping prepare prasad, the offering food that we would give, because people started coming. And by the end of the summer, I was there for the whole summer until we all had to leave. It was too cold to be there any longer. um, and so there were, on the weekends, there would be 100 people there or more. So there was a lot of feeding to be done.
Now, they were there to hear Ram Dass speak?
Ram Dass,
Did he give
yes.
lectures at that point there?
Yes, he would talk. The lecture is a little formal for what the experience was. It was more him sitting on the ground and us all sitting on the ground around him. There was nothing formal happening. There was no schedule. There was no things that you had to do. Some people went off to Woodstock when it was happening.
It sounds very biblical in a way, the way that you're describing this. Ram Dass, he's sitting there and conveying these truths to his disciples.
Right. Basically, he was talking about his experience with Maharaji. It was like, and of course, Ram Dass, having come from a background of psychology and everything he had gone through with Timothy Leary, being fired from Harvard, doing all their experimentation with psilocybin and doing all these studies with people about consciousness and writing about consciousness. He had a lot of wisdom.
He did bring back this wisdom from India that you're talking about, and the light was pouring through him.
And the heart space was incredible. Yes.
Yeah. When did you get the desire yourself to go to the source, to go to India? I know that you mentioned in past conversations about having a photograph and that being like a point of contact there.
Basically, what happened is that Ram Dass had been told not to speak about Maharaji when he returned to the West. He could do nothing else, but he never gave his name. He only called him Maharaji. He did not say Neem Karoli Baba. He never told us where he was located. He never told us how to get there, how to find him. But after that summer, Ram Dass went off to the West Coast. He went off on a teaching round, okay? And he was coming back to the East Coast in winter. That winter, I don't remember if it was January, February, some cold month. And the first place he was going was actually Montreal, because the person who was a disc jockey there on one of the stations had been playing his tapes online. Not online, on air, excuse me. Right. A modern head coming in. And of course, that person was Mitchell Markus, who became Raghu. And a group of us from New York, about 7 of us, got in a car to go up to see Ram Dass as soon as he got back to the East Coast. So we went up to Montreal. And while we were there, 2 of the people in the group said they were going to India and they were going to find Maharaji come hell or high water. And Ram Dass looked at the group of us that were there, and we're talking about Krishna Das, the people who became Krishna Das, Ramesha Das, all of these people. And he looked at us and he said, I will tell you where to go. And it was like suddenly being given the secret of the Supreme. All of a sudden, we knew that we could go to India. I mean, it still involved some of them writing letters to KK, who is one of the close Indian devotees of Maharaji, and sort of trying to get permission. That's a whole other story, which is in love, everyone. But we knew at that point we could go. And of course, we wanted to go to the source. Whatever Ram Dass had gotten from Maharaji, we wanted for ourselves.
Why do you think Ram Dass felt the need to convey this truth. Obviously, it's having this truth. I mean, and having in Ram Dass's spirit, obviously, he felt that he had to share that truth and be a light onto the world. But it's interesting how Maharaji, in a way, commanded him, like, do not talk about this. And then he just felt like right. I'm just going to do it anyway. Why do you think
right.
Was
he held
just
on a long time. He held on a long time before he divulged that information. He came back in 1968, and we're talking now the winter of 1970.
You now knew that you could go to India, and the information was there. When did you decide, okay, I got to go? I got to go to the source. What was the inception point for that?
Oh, that was almost immediate. I mean, if we could be with Maharaji, what else did we want? And of course, the first thing was I had to earn the money to go. I couldn't just get on a plane and go. I didn't have the money. I hadn't worked all summer. So the first thing I did was went to New York and I got a job. And I put together the grand total of $1,200. $600 was for my round trip plane ticket, and $600 was to live on for a year. Sounds like ancient history, doesn't it?
What convinced you, though, of this essential truth of this, the light that was coming through Ram Dass? I know it's very experiential in many ways, but what was it just a feeling?
We were called. I mean, there was no question that we were being called to go to India. I mean, we didn't even think about it. I mean, it was like, yeah, we can go. We're going.
Do you want to share your experience with the photograph of Maharaji?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure.
After that summer, when Ram Dass was away, and he was at the Lama Foundation for a period of time where there was no phone, there was no getting in touch with him. And I had not yet the woman who became my first sort of teacher. And during that time, I had a friend who invited me over, and we split a tab of acid. And in that experience, it must have all split on my side because she never got off, and I was flying off above the mountains and landing in some temple somewhere and having some incredible initiatory experience. And the next day I was back home, which was at my parents' house because I was saving all my money to go to India. And all I had was a tiny picture, a black and white picture that Ram Dass had given us of Maharaji, and the wooden mala, the wooden New Hampshire pine mala that he had given us. And the second day after the trip, I still had not come down, and I was now in places that were getting scary. Hands reaching up for help. I mean, it was going into realms that were not the temple initiation. This was coming down into much more frightening astral realms. And so I took this little picture I had of Maharaji, and I sat there and I went, I'm scared and you've got to help me. I couldn't get in touch with Ram Dass. I mean, I didn't know anybody else to talk to about these things. So it was a mantra I just kept repeating. I'm scared and you've got to help me. And soon the picture sort of dissolved into blue light, and I could see Maharaji moving. And I knew it was him. And it was only for a second. But it was enough for me to know he was there and it was okay. And I could lie down and go through the rest of the experience, and I was going to be okay. And needless to say, after that, I got a much larger picture of Maharaji and hung on my wall. And everything in my life, I started talking to him about. And it was like I knew he was there. And sometimes I could feel him there. I could see him there. And so my connection to him happened long before I met him physically. And actually, the first time I met Maharaji, one of the first things he said to me was, "You used to talk to my picture all the time." He said, "You asked many questions."
How can you possibly respond to something like when that's obvious? It's a miracle. I mean, you've written about this in your
Right.
works, of course, but
Yeah.
how does something like that feel? Is it just can you even put it into words?
What it does is it sort of puts the stamp of reality on it. In other words, this is true. There is communication beyond picking up a telephone. There is somebody whose consciousness can reach out to me. There is this connection to a being of that type of consciousness. And it made it all real. It was solid. It was absolutely solid because I had completely experienced it.
So it was time to go to India at this point.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
way time to go to India.
No
So when I
doubt
say
in mind.
we were called, I mean it. I mean, there was no question about it.
How did so you were living with your family at the time. How did your family feel about the fact that you were like, I'm going to India? Were they skeptical or were they fully on board? How did that work?
Oh no, they were horrified. Oh God. Well, India at that time was literally half a world away. I mean, even to have a phone call, I mean, there would be like one phone at the hotel that you would have to book in advance a call for like the next day. I mean, it was, and then maybe there'd be a connection and maybe there wouldn't be. There was snail mail, which took forever, but that was it. So we really were gone. We were far away from family. It was, as a matter of fact, while I was there, my mother once sent me a Polaroid of a bagel. It was sort of like, come home, see what you're missing.
Did they ever come around to the experiences that you had and like when you came back?
Well, even before I went, during this time that I was still living with them, although I did get an apartment in a room in the city when I started working there to make the money to go to India. And of course, once your heart is open that way, it's open to all those beings. And I was sitting, they had gone out to dinner or something or another, and I was home alone. And I was sitting with a picture of Christ that I had. And I was crying, thinking about the type of crying where your heart is just overwhelmed, not from grief or anything like that. It was just that heart connection that brings up tears. And they happened to come home at that point and see me crying over a picture of Christ. And they asked me if I wanted to go into therapy. I said, I've never been happier in my life.
I'm sure coming from a Jewish background too, they were probably like, right. What's going on here?
What's going on here? Right. So yeah, I really put them through it.
Oh, wow. But so you end up going to India. How was that journey? So you're talking about it's a half a world away, especially back then. Like today, you just get on an airplane. It's kind of taken for granted. You're just on the other side of the world. You can be there in a few hours. It's like nothing.
Yeah.
But
15 hours you can be there. Yeah.
Yeah. So
nonstop.
So how was the journey for you?
Oh, it was much different than that. Trying to go, of course, the cheapest way possible. I wound up going with two of the people that I had met in the meditation group that I had become part of, where I first learned to actually meditate. And they wanted to go to India at that time, although they were going to see Satya Sai Baba. And I was wanting to go see Neem Karoli Baba. But the three of us traveled together, another woman and a man. And so we took one of the last cheapo flights that went between New York and London. Then in London, we had tickets to go on the last of these cheap Arab flights that were happening between London and Bombay. And we had 10 days before that. So we went across the channel. We wound up at an ashram, I believe, in Brussels, where everything was Mitchell whipped cream. And we hitchhiked, basically. So the guy would hide with our luggage, and the other girl and I would be out front getting the rides. And then we took that flight, which took us, there were 7 stops between London and Bombay. I mean, and one of them was in Cairo, where we turned in our passports and went out to see on a tourist bus thing to take us to see the pyramids. And of course, somebody had given me a Jewish star that I was wearing at the time. And the first stop they took us to was Nasser's tomb. And I walked around the whole time like this. Because it was during the war between Egypt and Israel. I mean, as we left the airport, there were all the rolls of barbed wire and people standing with machine guns and all of that. Yeah. So it was quite the adventure.
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, it sounds like it. But then you finally get to India. I'm assuming that when you get there, it's not an easy journey getting from the airport to the temple. So,
well, yeah. First of all, as I said, the cheap flight was to Bombay. It wasn't to Delhi. And it was during the winter. And during the winter, nobody knew where Maharaji was. So there was no point going up there. So I went with these other people to go see Satya Sai Baba. And we took we knew nothing. Oh my God. We took a 3rd class train ride from Bombay all the way to Whitefield, to where Sai Baba's ashram was, which was 2.5 days across India. It was a long journey, living on Fanta soda, which is orange soda, and biscuits, cookies, because it was the only thing I felt safe eating. And at any time anybody has done a 3rd class trip on an Indian train, they'll know what I went through.
So how did those experiences with Sai Baba compare with Maharaji? I mean, they're obviously 2 different experiences. I'm sure one is not necessarily better than the other. They're different. But like, what was the experience like there? And then when did you decide to press forward and go to see Maharaji?
Well, during the time I'd been in New York was a time when there were a lot of gurus coming through to America. And so I had spent time with Swami Muktananda. I had spent time with other of these beings that were coming through. And then I met Satya Sai Baba. Here's the avatar. Muktananda was the Paramahans. I mean, these were beings with big titles and big followings. And I always thought, well, something must be wrong with me. I can't bow down to them. I can't open my heart to them. Something's got to be wrong with me. Not realizing that these just simply weren't my lineage. This was not where my connection was. So the time with Sai Baba was during a time where he was not paying a lot of attention to the Westerners. And I was there for 3 months. And during that time, he spoke to me twice. Once he said, "Your husband is waiting for you." And the other time it was, "Do you have a son?" And that was it. That was my entire interaction with him. Whereas I was living in a small house with a bunch of women. It was the women's house. And they were treating him sort of like Elvis. They were swooning over him. They were completely in love. They were desperate for his attention. And I just felt like, oh God, I'm in the wrong place. And then finally, I had written to Ram Dass, who was back in India at that point. And I had heard that they were doing a retreat up in Kosani, up in the mountains of the foothills of the Himalayas. And I wrote to him and asked whether I could come up and be in that retreat that they were doing. And he wrote back and said, "No girls." So eventually I did convince somebody else to leave Sai Baba's with me. And we took a train. First, we had to go down to Madras and there catch a train that was almost 3 days up to Delhi. And about an hour after I got on the train, I came down with a fever and with hepatitis because we'd been drinking water from the village well. We didn't know anything about parasites. We didn't know about hepatitis. We didn't know anything. We were incredibly ignorant travelers. And so I spent the entire journey with a fever of about 104. Fortunately, we had a private, we were not in third class. We were in first class, which meant we had our own bunk beds and our own bathroom, which was very fortunate because that's where I spent most of my time. And towards the end of that journey, I had a vision where it was, I'm sure, fever induced, but it was a vision that I was in my grade school cafeteria with the sticky tabletops and just a gross setting, right? And I looked up, and in the doorway of the cafeteria was the white-robed Christ. And he couldn't come in because of the setting. He couldn't come into that cafeteria. And after that, I knew that I was going through this experience in order to be cleaned out and ready to meet Maharaji. I mean, I took it as a complete purification. And I spent the next 6 weeks actually in the hotel. I finally got up. We got to Delhi, took a taxi up to Nainital, which is where the Evelyn Hotel was, which is where we had been told to go in order to meet Maharaji in Kenji. And as I said, Maharaji was not yet there. And Ram Dass and the boys were up in Kosani doing their retreat. And I was sort of dumped at the hotel, and the guy I was with went up to where Ram Dass was. And I spent the next 6 weeks in the hotel getting better from hepatitis. And then at the point where I was better, suddenly word came that Maharaji was back.
So it's safe to say with Sai Baba that the group that was there was not your soul pod, and you had to go
No.
and you had to be with your soul pod. And I mean,
Yes.
I think based on everything you're saying, all the illnesses that you came down with and the length of the journey itself, clearly there was a conviction there that really could not be. It was insatiable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
You had to get to your soul pod.
I had to get there. Get there. Absolutely.
What do you make of those visions of Christ, though, you're talking about? Because I know you're talking about how you had an image that you were getting you were emotional with, and then you also had this vision of him.
I've always had not always. I mean, ever since I opened to this realm, I always had a very strong feeling that I had somehow seen him. Not that I had been with him, but that I may have been in a crowd where I saw him at some connection was there. And he really represented, especially that white-robed resurrected Christ, represented that, quote, cosmic consciousness that Leary had written about so long ago. It was my internal image of what that state was, because I had not yet been with Maharaji.
I went to Catholic school growing up. It's very interesting how how Christ can, in the Christ consciousness, it transcends all bounds. Essentially, it transcends all affiliations.
Yes. And Maharaji talked about Christ all the time.
So when you got to Maharaji's temple and you were there,
right?
What was your first experience like when you actually arrived and you saw him in person?
Well, even going back to just arriving in Nainital, in the foothills, I felt like I was home. I mean, I felt like I looked like the women that were there. I remember dressing like the women who were there. I mean, it was like I suddenly, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in a place where I belonged. It was like an extraordinary experience. And when we arrived at the temple, I mean, it was almost like I knew where to go, I knew what to do type of thing. It felt very familiar to me. And then seeing him, as I said, I had had these experiences with these other spiritual teachers or gurus where I felt like something was wrong with me. I couldn't open my heart, I couldn't touch their feet. With Maharaji, it was instantaneous. It was the surrender that is no surrender.
And
That
he was,
experience of just, I'm home. Here I am,
yeah,
I'm home. Yeah.
and he was very much an egalitarian, if I understand that correctly as well, right?
Yes.
He didn't really have that much of a distinction between men and women.
Right. In most places, most ashrams in India, the women are on one side. They follow Hindu tradition. Women on one side, men on the other side. Westerners can't step into the kitchen. I mean, it's not pure. I mean, foreigners were like below the lowest caste. It's like, so he had none of that. He had none of that at all. Yeah, we all sat together. There were no distinctions. Yeah.
So what was it like finally meeting him? I know I've heard you mention in
Yeah.
the past that he immediately knew that you had been talking to him.
One of the first things he said to me was, "You used to talk to my picture all the time. You asked many questions." The other thing that he did that first time was he reached over at one point and just took like a fingertip right here. And no, sorry, right here, right at the top of my head. And he just touched it. And I literally felt like every cell in my body rearrange. It was an incredible feeling. It was just, I mean, I knew that I was where I had to be, that this was it. This is what I'd been searching for. This was what I had been looking to satisfy my soul. It was all there in that first moment with him.
When you arrive at that point and you have discovered what you have been looking for, what kind of feelings do you have at that point? Because I mean, I think many people in life, life is a journey in many ways, and you're all constantly searching. But then, if like it sounds like you found what you were looking for, how does that relate to your journey of life? And then, what do you do from that point forward?
That's the beginning of the journey. Because after that, you still got to deal with all your stuff. It's not like I became instantly enlightened, but I had seen what the light was. I experienced what it was. It's very hard to describe what it is to sit in the presence of unconditional love, because it's not an experience that any of us have growing up. All the love that we know is conditional in some way. Your parents want you to be a good little boy or girl. I mean, your teachers have expectations of you. It's not just bathing in this presence of love, which becomes a palpable thing. It becomes not only real, but it becomes like the only real essence that there is. And you're sitting in it. So on one hand, it's incredibly blissful. And on the other hand, the light is so bright that it brings up any darkness within you. And heaven knows we've all got it. And so half the time you're in bliss, and the other half you're down by the river crying. It's like, I'm so impure. Oh my God, how do I do this? How do I become that light?
Yeah, so those are very complicated feelings. How do you reconcile those two? I mean, you wrote a
That's
book.
the rest of your life.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, you wrote this book, Love Everyone, and I know the basic essence of Maharaji's teaching in many ways was this unconditional love. What does it mean to love everyone?
Well, Maharaji didn't lecture, he didn't teach, he didn't do anything. He just sat there basically and radiated. And he could say one thing to you one day and the opposite the next. So there was nothing that you could really hold on to. It was all happening on a different level. Okay. But the main teaching that he did have, and in many different forms, boiled down to love everyone, serve everyone, remember God, and tell the truth. Simple words, difficult concepts. uh, serve everyone sometimes became feed everyone. It was the same thing. You can't bring God to the hungry. You need to feed them, right? And then you need to feed on other levels with other people who have food. Then you can go to other places. Love everyone is incredibly. It's not like people here imagine love. You've got to understand. In English, we have only that one word, love. In Sanskrit, there are, I think, 40, 50 versions of love. There's love of the guru, love of your mother, love of your son, love of your house, love of your country, love of the hills, love of the tree. Everything has a different flavor to it. um, but to get to a place where you love everyone, as Ram Dass, who was probably the best, who was the best of everyone, to try to elucidate what any of this meant. It was like seeing beyond somebody's personality, beyond their stuff, beyond the way they present, beyond all of that, and to recognize them not as their role, but as a soul. And once you acknowledge that everybody else is a soul, that everybody else also has this connection, whether they're aware of it or not, to something that's beyond their little personality, then even if you can't really like that person and may actively dislike that person, I can think of a few right now, but at least in your head, there's a way to get beyond that. There's a way to think that, okay, I can accept that this is another human being, or that is not just what I see before me.
So we're called to love everyone regardless of baggage.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Which means you don't have to like them.
So it's interesting. You say love everyone, serve everyone. It reminds me a lot of Matthew 25. We're talking a little bit about Christianity here in some ways, but like if you see the homeless, or if you see someone who's hungry and you don't actively go out of your way to do something, it's almost in a sense rejecting God.
Yeah, that sort of sounds like Catholic guilt to me. No.
Oh, okay. So
I mean, if you see that homeless person, and heaven knows that we see them all the time, you may want to give something, or you may walk on by. It's just how you may walk by and just give them a blessing. It's like a metta in Vipassana Buddhism. You can walk through a grocery store going, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be, and that is feeding them, that is loving them, that is sending that energy to them. You don't have to say it
Okay.
out loud. No, no,
You don't
no.
even need to say it out loud. Interesting.
No,
Okay.
no. It's like doing a mantra. You don't have to say your mantra out loud. It's the way you connect. It's the way you plant that seed of going beyond our 3D reality. An interesting practice. I mean, look up what the metta is about and try it when you're going past the homeless, when you're going through the grocery store, when you're seeing suffering. Just send out that energy. Send out that blessing.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's a really wonderful way of putting it. I've never, honestly, I haven't really even thought about it that way. So that's fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Well, Maharaji, as I said, talked about Christ all the time because he said Hanuman and Christ are the same. Hanuman is the Hindu deity that's a monkey god. He's basically an incarnation of the Lord Shiva, and there were many people in India who believed that Maharaji was an incarnation of Hanuman. Hanuman, after the whole Ramayana, I don't know if you know the epic of one of the great Indian epics is called the Ramayana. And it's the story of Lord Rama's incarnation. And his wife Sita gets abducted by Ravana, the evil. She gets abducted. And Hanuman and the monkeys and bear armies are sent out to search for where she is so that Ram can then go rescue her. Okay. And after everything is resolved and the war is done and the bad guy is dead and Sita is returned to Ram and they're back at their kingdom, Sita is giving gifts to the people who served. And she gives Hanuman this beautiful pearl necklace, probably worth a fortune. Okay. And in front of everybody's eyes, Hanuman starts biting down on each pearl, breaking each one open and throwing it away. And he's going, I don't see my Lord Ram and Mata Sita here in these pearls. And somebody looks at him and says, well, do you have them inside you? And he opens his chest and you see Ram and Sita and brother Lakshman within him. So it's an image that's very similar to the heart of Christ when you see that symbol of the light within him, within his heart. And it's a very similar story in many ways.
Yeah, wow, that's wonderful. Are you talking about the Sacred Heart of Jesus?
The Sacred Heart of Jesus, absolutely.
Okay.
And here's Hanuman ripping open his chest so they can see that the Lord lives in his heart. Yeah.
Did you learn this when you were in India, or is this something that you learned when you were back in New Hampshire?
No, I mean, we did readings from the Ramayana every week. There was a whole group of us at that time going to see Maharaji and Kenshi. Ram Dass was there. There were maybe 20 of us in the beginning. And every weekend, Ram Dass would read from either, it was the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. I don't know that book. It was an old one. Really beautiful book. Or The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment, or something from the Ramayana. It was part of the mythology, part of the world and culture that we learned while we were there.
Yeah. So how long were you there for?
A year, until my visa was up, and Maharaji said, "Ciao."
Time to go.
Time to go. And of course, we thought he'd always be there. It was like we planned to go back to the West, get healthy again, because being in India it was wonderful for the soul, not so good for the body. I'd been through hepatitis. I mean, there were people who came down with malaria. There were I couldn't digest half the food. I was living on charcoal pills and digestive enzymes. So it was like, okay, let's go back, get healthy, and then we'll come back to India and see him over and over again throughout our lives. And then, of course, he fooled us all and left his body in 1973.
So when you left, that was
I
the
left
last time.
I left in March of 72. And that
Okay,
was
and
my
that was
last.
the last time that you saw him in his body?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was a shock because we considered him like an eternal being. I mean, you can imagine what happened when Jesus was crucified. It's like it was suddenly he's gone. Where is he? What do we do with our lives now?
What did you do
difficult.
after that? Coming back to America, and I know that right around that time, I believe Ram Dass was putting together "Be Here Now," and you played a
that
role
actually
with that?
happened before we went to India.
Oh,
That
okay,
happened. Yeah. It came out while we were in India, but it was done before we left.
Gotcha. And you played a role in helping put that together too, right?
Yes, a very, very small role. What happened was after that summer of living in at Ram Dass's, the main part of the book, the brown pages, as they're called, was all done at Lama Foundation. They were the artists who put it together. I worked on the first part, his story part, which he had written out by hand and that he sent to me to type up, and I mildly edited it and cleaned it up a little bit, and that was my role, is just that part of his story, Be Here Now. Yeah.
How do you feel about playing a role in the composition of that text? I mean, that book has really inspired millions and millions and millions of people, and it's changed so many people's lives as well.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't feel a lot of personal glory, so to speak. What I mean, because my role was very minor in it, but it served me very well over the years, because that would be the first thing that people would see on my resume when I went to do work was I worked on Be Here Now.
That's amazing. Wow. So, okay. So you come back to America. Did you go back to your family initially? Or
no, I was married. Maharaji married me. Right.
You were with...
What happened to you?
There's just a blackout here, I think.
No, I heard...
Yeah, I just heard thunder outside, actually. So there must have been just a blackout. Wow. Well, that's strange.
Somehow the recording seems to still be going on.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Because I mean, your computer hasn't gone down.
Yeah, no, I'm connected to the Wi-Fi right now still, too. So that's a little odd. Maybe Maharaji's powering this computer, because I have I have no idea how the computer is still on. It makes no sense, actually. And it says it's charging, too.
Right.
That's very odd.
It's very Maharaji.
Is that, oh my gosh. So there must be, so there's little miracles happening all the time, right?
All the time. I mean, the stories in Whisper in the Heart really show that. I mean, there's a story I was just looking at before where somebody had said they were at, I don't remember what event they were at, a kirtan or talk or something or another. And they were looking at Maharaji's picture that was up on stage and going, I really need proof. I really need proof that you're real. This is somebody that hadn't been with him in India. And he said, if you're real, turn the power off. And at that point, it went.
I have no understanding of how this is all still working. It's kind of wild that we may have caught a miracle like in real time.
And not only that, you're this disembodied head. That's blackness.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a little scary, but okay.
Whisper in the Heart. I mean, I interviewed well, I and another woman interviewed about 150 people who had had experiences of Maharaji after he left his body. Some were through dreams, some were through attending Krishna Das or Jayutal kirtans, chanting. Some are through really wild experiences where he actually showed up. And I know they're real because I had that experience through his picture before I met him. So I know that that's entirely possible. There are stories of people who did meet him through photographs or met him through reading a book or through hearing somebody tell a story about him. And all of a sudden, they have that experience of darshan, of the dream that's not a dream.
Wow.
And anything's possible. Let me look up, let's see if I can find that story about the lights, about the towers.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Really funny.
Isn't that funny?
Oh, here it is. I'll read it to you. Okay.
Oh, you just opened right up to it. That's wild.
Well, I actually have tabs on certain stories that I've used for various things.
Gotcha.
And I just happened to be strolling through it before. Okay, this is from Derek, whose other name is Gunga Das. I first got involved with Baba when I was living on Oahu and feeling really depressed after a heartbreak. A woman I knew advised me to seek out the person who was most influential in my life. To me, that was Ram Dass. I wasn't at all sure about Maharaji. Some years later, at the Makawao Union Church on Maui, Krishna Das was playing. Near the middle of that evening concert, he went into the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I was looking at the picture of Maharaji on stage and having doubts. I said to the photo, Maharaji, I cannot go any further with this whole thing unless I know for sure that you're really with me, that you can hear what I am saying right now. I put him to the test. If you are real, if you're really with me, you need to shut the power off in this entire place right now. As soon as I said that, boom, all the power of the entire room went off. All the sound equipment, the speakers, the sound gone, and complete darkness. Then poof, it came right back on again. That was the most profound, immediate, unbelievable experience.
Wow, that's amazing. It's very, very poignant, and yeah.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
we're just going to carry on with the power outage. I mean, everything's working, so let's just keep on doing
everything's working, right?
Yeah. Wow. So when you got back to the United States and Maharaji had left his body,
well, not yet. I mean, we came back in 72 and he left his body in September of 73.
Okay.
So there was a period, the first 6 months we were back, we were all clinging as tightly as we could to everything, to everything. I mean, my new mother-in-law gave me a gift of these beautiful leather gloves, and I was horrified. I can't wear leather. I mean, it's not. So we were really infants in the journey. But then the roles that we sort of had been given took over. Raghu, Maharaji used to call him broadcaster. I mean, he had met, as I said, Ram Dass met him when he was a DJ at a radio station in Montreal. So he was the broadcaster. And so he started doing what he could in terms of bringing out music, bringing out various things that way. And Maharaji used to, because I had been Ram Dass's secretary during that summer, Maharaji used to call me private secretary. And then at one point he looked at me and he said, you used to be Ram Dass's private secretary, now you're mine. So in a sense, that's what I've been doing. I've been a private secretary.
Still to this day, with the work that you've composed, still, Whisper in the Heart and Love Everyone.
And Love Everyone, yeah. So still to this day. And what's so funny is that when I was in college, upon graduation with a degree in English and art, totally non-commercial vehicles, my two choices were either to teach or to be a secretary. And I had no desire ever to be a teacher. So I became a secretary. And it was something I had always said I would never do. I never wanted to be a secretary. And then suddenly it became like my life's dream to be Maharaji's private secretary.
That's interesting how we kind of just fall into things, how the path becomes clear after.
Right.
Yeah, you may just need some sort of impetus to actually to clear out the path and to see your direction forward.
Right.
And Maharaji was that for so many people.
So besides these books on Maharaji, what I have done is I've edited, been a developmental editor for many people's memoirs, people who were with Maharaji. I mean, I did Krishna Das's book, Chance of a Lifetime. I just finished Ramdev's book. It's like a lot of the. I've been a secretary. I've helped to bring these stories of these people who had this connection with Maharaji out into the world.
After Maharaji did eventually leave his body, how long did it take before you started hearing these stories of experiences of people that were not even connected initially?
It happened even before he left his body with people who had just never been to India. It's always been there. I mean, Ram Dass used to hear these stories all the time. People were always writing to him with a dream they had or an experience they had in meditation, or it was constant that happened.
It's interesting when you hear from people, and you've wrote extensively about this, how there are people that had zero connection. They didn't even know exactly, like they didn't know who Maharaji was. Yeah, exactly. And then they eventually, throughout their life, they came around to understanding the experience that they had and that connection to Maharaji. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's an incredible story about a woman in France who had been ill and had gone to a hospital in Paris for 3 days. And when she came back, the man that she had been living with for a long time had gone. All his stuff was gone. Everything was gone. He had disappeared. And she had all sorts of problems in her life. And she took a bunch of pills and lay down fully dressed and said, "This is it. I'm out of here." And who knows how much longer later, all of a sudden, she gets up. She's not dead. And she sees that her front door is actually open a little bit. And she says, "I know I closed that before I went to bed." And she goes over and opens the door, and there's this, quote, tramp lying in the hallway in front of her door. And she goes to get him an orange or something to eat. And when she comes back, he's gone. But he said something to her about, I don't remember the exact story. I should look it up before I tell you something wrong. But basically, she went to her computer to put on some music because music was very important to her. And instead of her usual music coming up, what came up was Krishna Das doing kirtan. And in the background, which she had never seen before, and in the background, there's Maharaji's picture. There's the tramp.
Gosh, this is so wild.
And she went on this journey to find out, who is this person? How do I find him? What do I do? And she wound up going to India and being at the temple. And I mean, just an extraordinary story. I mean, a lot of the other stories are not that mind-blowing in terms of him actually appearing the way he did to this woman in France, but they're all exceedingly powerful to that person that has them. Whether it's a dream that just shakes you to your core because it's absolutely real, or something that happens in meditation, or through a picture, or through chanting, or through anything.
These experiences of Maharaji, I mean, they range in different levels of magnitude sometimes, but the impact is.
But the essence is the same.
The essence is
the essence is the same. because they experience that it touching their hearts. I mean, and over again, what you hear in the stories is, I suddenly felt like I was home, or I burst into tears. Which is that expression of the heart opening. It's over and over again. I'm home, and here come the tears.
After Maharaji did leave his body, we were talking about these individuals that have had visions after that. Maharaji has played a major role in really indirectly, but directly, you can say, in the development of the world. I mean, you can talk about individuals like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Brilliant, who I know.
Well, Larry was with Maharaji.
So he was with, right. But and then Larry was friends with Steve Jobs, I believe, right?
Right, very close friends. Yeah, actually, when Steve died, the only picture he had in his room was one of Maharaji.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of that connection with Maharaji and the development of society since he has left his body? Because it's a pretty interesting connection. I mean, with all these figures that have been involved with technology, and if you're talking about Mark Zuckerberg with social media, they've been inspired in many ways by Maharaji. Right. So what do you make of that connection?
Well, I mean, I don't know either Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, although I do love my Apple my Apple products. I don't know what that big picture is. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what the purpose is. It's beyond my pay grade, as the saying goes. I mean, I'm glad for anything that brings more love and compassion into the world. It's that simple. I mean, anything that gets people beyond just gross materialism or greed or any of the destructive forces in society. Anything that helps do that, I bow down to.
You've had these books that you've published, which everyone out there, I love everyone, and Whisper in the Heart as well. Please check those books out. They're incredible. There we go. There we go. Do you have any other works in the works coming up?
This fall, through Mandala Publishing, in connection with the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation, there's a book coming out that I edited, which is based on Gay Dillingham's film of Dying to Know, which is the story basically when Tim Leary found out that he was dying of cancer. They arranged for Ram Dass to come down and meet with Timothy Leary, and they filmed sort of this last conversation in person between the two of them. And they're talking about Leary's upcoming death and about all these other things and playing with each other as they always did. So, and it's got a lot of artwork, photos from the film, a lot of stills from the film, and a lot of the direct dialogue from the film, as well as me filling in sort of the background of some of the material. So and it's just called, I believe they're just calling it Dying to Know. I will soon be working on a book that's really Ram Dass's take on wholeness, getting beyond polarization, which is something that we need desperately right now. Yeah. So it'll just be of me editing down a lot of the spoken material from Ram Dass on that topic. Yeah.
So what is your relationship like with your soul pod since coming back from India?
It's still the people that I'm closest to in my life. I mean, we may not see each other often, or we may not. It's the type of thing where even if you haven't seen somebody in 10 years, if you get together, you're immediately connected, immediately back together. And yeah, it's still the pod.
So Ram Dass left his body in 2019, I believe in December.
Yeah.
When you came back from India, what was your relationship like with Ram Dass between those times?
Well, you got to realize that when we came back from India, the first thing that was happening was, I mean, we're talking about a lot of 20-year-olds who were just recently married and started having babies. So that became the focus, and that definitely was not Ram Dass's venue. So it was. I worked with pregnant women. I did labor coaching for women in labor. That became sort of the focus during those years of having babies and raising families and doing that. And of course, during that time is when I started voluntarily, not being paid, let's put it that way, working on books like from the stories of the old devotees who had been with Maharaji for like 40 years, where we did Dada Mukherjee's By His Grace, or The Near and the Dear, or KK's book, or that's what started my book career, so to speak. My editing career was working on those.
It's interesting how Ram Dass was working with people that were dying, and at that time you were working with people that were being born.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of complementary in many ways.
Right.
Did you see him at all?
Well, there were times. I mean, he traveled a lot, and we were sort of stationary for him. Babies will do that to you. And we started the Hanuman temple in Taos. And when we would have gatherings there is when I would see Ram Dass or see a lot of the other satsang. Was when we would get together for Bandara, which is the celebration of Maharaji's Mahasamadhi, of when he left his body. Yeah. So that would be a time when a lot of the larger group, would come together. Now that temple has been Hanuman is no longer. Ram Dass commissioned this beautiful statue of Hanuman flying because he figured, well, he has to fly from India to America. So there's this gorgeous marble statue of Hanuman, and now there's a big, beautiful new temple there that Hanuman is in, and there are still gatherings. Anybody can look up the Neem Karoli Baba temple in Taos online and see what that's about. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful place to visit.
So how did your experiences in India inform your role as a mother? You said when you came back, everyone was having children.
We're talking about a bunch of old hippies. Okay. So the first thing was, okay, we're going to have natural childbirth. We're going to do this naturally. We're going to grow organic food. We're going to do all of that. And when we first came back, a number of us were living together. Raghu's father, who had also been in India with Maharaji, had this farm in the eastern townships of Canada. And so quite a number of us lived there through the summer. And during that time, two of the women had babies at the farmhouse. Three of them actually had babies at the farmhouse. And so I was all set to do the same when my turn came. And then I found out that I needed a C-section. It was like, oh God. So it was a lot of coming to terms with, we each have our individual karma. We each have our own stuff we have to get through. It's still, as I said, meeting Maharaji, being with him was the beginning of the journey, not the end. It was the beginning.
When you're talking about everyone having their own individual karma and working out their journeys when it comes to that, how, a little bit more of a philosophical kind of spiritual question, how do people work out their karma, and are they able to overcome their karma? How exactly does that work? And is love a component involved in that?
Love is involved in everything. It's the bottom line. So whatever it is, love is involved. Karma is an incredibly complex concept. And again, way beyond my pay grade. All I know is that I have my own stuff to work through. And I have tried many different pathways, as everybody has. You seek out the teachers that you need. I mean, Maharaji is the Sat Guru. The rest are what we call Upa Gurus. Upa Gurus are those who sort of can show you what direction to go in. It's like people talk now about having a golf guru, or right? So it's like, okay, this is a person who can teach me golf. This is a person who can teach me how to work with my mind, how to work with my emotions. This is so you can have many, many teachers. The Satguru is the one who is the way, who is the being, who is that, which you're trying to learn how to get to, right? And so Maharaji is the Satguru for those of us who are in that lineage or in that path. Yeah. So there's many ways to work on yourself. I mean, there's everything from therapy to Reiki to you name it.
So what does your practice look like?
Well, it's interesting. I have begun sitting in the mornings with this group of gray-haired practitioners of Zen that have a silent half-hour meditation in the mornings, which I just love to do. And that's all I want. I don't want Dharma talks. I don't want. I do enough of that in my work. I want silence. I want to see what's within me. I want to connect to Maharaji that way. There are kirtans that we have up in Ojai where the Love Serve Remember Foundation has its headquarters. And about maybe 30 of us get together and sing. Devotion is a huge part of the practice with Maharaji. It's something that in the West we're so shy about, but it's a really vital component in terms of how are you going to love everyone if you don't know what devotion is?
So do you find yourself focusing more on experiential things and practice rather than the like the deep, like philosophical and spiritual kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I use my mind for my work. I have to. And when I'm not, I want to be silent. I want to find the space within myself. I've been with a lot of teachers where I gave away a lot of my power. These are the lessons I've had to learn. So it's come to the point, and thank God, I mean, I'm almost 80, where where I'm not looking for anything from outside of myself because I know it's all in here.
Ultimately, is everything that we need truly inside ourselves?
I believe so. Yeah.
You think so?
I really do.
Our salvation is within us.
Is within us.
Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Very liberating thought too. Some Christian traditions coming from that perspective, they believe that faith is the way towards salvation. And so what you're talking about, what you're discussing is if our salvation is found within us, maybe that's that core faith that.
Well, faith and devotion are the same thing.
Yeah,
you know, that's what I'm talking about with devotion. Is that you're honoring that place that exists, that is beyond what the small self is. So
you said that you're close to 80. Sorry, not to bring up age or anything like that, but you said that
I did it. It's okay.
Yeah. You said you're close to 80. How do you feel spiritually right now? How do you feel in your place right now? Do you feel like there's still work to do, or do you feel
Yes.
satisfied?
Oh, no, I'm not. I am certainly not liberated in any sense of the word. It's not a one life journey. Yeah, I really believe that some part of us keeps going, and that we're in Earth School to learn, and we come back for class after class. And think of how many children that you can think of come in, and suddenly at 3 years old, they know how to play the piano. They know, or they are talking to their quote invisible friend, or they're still close to where they've come from and who they've been.
I'm sure you're familiar with the story. I forget his name, but there was a child who said that he was in World War II, I believe, and he was in a plane that got shot down. And he was telling his parents all about these dreams and these experiences that he had. And eventually they talked to a few people, and they were able to identify someone in the war that had crashed his plane and passed away. And they were able to line up everything. And it was, I think, University of Virginia did a study on that, and they were able to
There are many
identify
stories like that. Many.
Yeah, like if you were to look back at yourself when you were back in, let's even go before New Hampshire, when you were in college and you were trying to figure things out. What advice would you give to people that are on a spiritual journey of their own?
Follow your heart. If you get a call, listen. Don't be afraid. Follow your heart wherever it takes you. I mean, what else can you do? You can feed your mind as much as you want. There are so many books now. I mean, it's such a different landscape than when I was growing up. I mean, the only spiritual bookstore that I knew that existed was Weiser's in New York. And that was mostly very esoteric type of material rather than what we have, this proliferation we have now, which is very confusing in a lot of ways. So you really have to see, does this resonate with me? And if it does, follow it until it doesn't resonate anymore and find the next step, which may be totally different.
You went to school for English, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct?
Yeah, I always like to read.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite books growing up, and what are some of your favorite books today?
Well, today, as I said, I listen to I listen to audiobooks a lot. I mean, I'm in front of my computer all day long. I don't necessarily want to sit and read a Kindle on another machine. But it's the way I get myself to go outside and walk and do my exercise, is by having something that's going to compel me to want to know what's in the next chapter. And as I said, I like historical fiction a lot. I like certain mystery writers. I like certain somewhat eclectic. I don't like things that are really violent. I don't watch things that are violent. I don't want to bring that energy into myself. So I avoid that kind of material. I mean, in college, I remember one of my favorite courses was Russian literature. I just loved Dostoevsky and people like that. I mean, my relatives, my ancestors all came from Russia, Poland, Eastern Europe, somewhere. And I think there's some connection on a genetic level to that sort of material, that sort of feeling.
Was there a specific moment that you can recall in your early life where you decided, okay, I have this love of English and of literature, and this is something that I would like to do, write as a profession?
I never recalled anything about wanting a profession. I mean, As I said, all the girls I knew in college, all they wanted to do was get pinned, engaged, married, in that order, right? That was it. Hopefully with rich husbands. And the only people I knew going into professions were teachers. There were not a lot of women working in the world in professional roles during that time. There really weren't. They were secretaries. And that's what I became. And that's how I started editing, actually, when I was working at the research and development company in Cambridge. I mean, this Cambridge, Mass. We're talking about the home of MIT, Harvard, Brandeis, all these super powerful brains. Okay. And most of the people who worked there were young and out of these colleges and super smart, but they didn't know how to write for shit. And the main product of the company were these papers that were going out. And so I was a secretary. They'd give me the papers to type up. I would type them up. And as I did, I started just editing. I started cleaning them up. And within a very short period of time, I became an editor at the company as opposed to a quote secretary. And I was making the phenomenal sum of $700 a month, which was a big deal back then. So you could say that's what started me on my profession, was just having the nerve not to type up what they sent me, but saying, we got to clean this up for the clients. I can't let this go out this way.
So how do you make that transition from being an editor to being a author in your own right?
I'm not an author of, when people say that I say I've written books, they somehow immediately think, oh, I've written a novel. I'm not a fiction writer. I'm somebody who has gathered stories, because to me, story is really the basis of how information is communicated. I'm a big devotee of story and gathering these materials and then using my writing and editorial skill to put it together in some sort of linear fashion, because books are linear.
Would you consider yourself more of a compiler rather than an author, more of like an archivist in some ways?
An archivist, yeah, an editor. I'm happy to be an editor. I mean, it's certainly got my writing in it, but it's not like I have written the whole book. What I mean, one of my good friends and I actually wrote a children's book together, and that's one of the few things that we actually wrote a story.
That's nice. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? It's about witches, I think, right?
Of course, it's different than any other kid's book, so no publisher was going to want it because it didn't fit into any category for them, and we have it with a producer that it's in development as an animated series. Unfortunately, the book did not sell enough copies to make a major studio interested in it. But go to Izzy Casts a Spell on Facebook or Instagram and you'll see about it.
There you go, everyone. Check it out.
And like it and follow it. We need a lot of social media.
So when it comes to Whisper in the Heart, your most recent book, I guess you can say, outside of the children's book, when you are putting together, and this is also with Love Everyone as well, when you're compiling these stories of these experiences with all these individuals in the Soul Pod, how do you go about the process of compiling these experiences? Do you go out and seek out these individuals for their stories?
No, not really. I mean, Ram Dass, there are these retreats that were held and still are held yearly on Maui. Open Your Heart in Paradise. And at these events, I mean, there would be 400 people. And all I had to say was, if you have a story about meeting Maharaji, come see me.
We're coming up towards the end of the episode. I really appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic opportunity. Everyone out there, please check out Love Everyone, Whisper in the Heart.
In the Heart, and Izzy Casts a Spell.
The stories that you've shared are very powerful, and I hope that this conversation can inspire some people out there to do some spiritual exploration of their own, and to read your works and maybe see some experiences that other people have had out there, and hopefully that can resonate with people. Again, thank you for your time. This means a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Have a good day. All right.
You too.